While other sportscasters have been using Taylor Swift puns the last week, I just keep dancing on my own because the Phillies are back in the postseason. And thanks to the Cubs' epic collapse, the Phillies are the 1 seed in the wild card, which means, yes, there will be postseason baseball in Philadelphia next week. We'll get into Red October, plus the Eagles' successful start to the season and the Philadelphia Union here on this episode of Sports Talk Philadelphia. Welcome back to Sports Talk Philadelphia. As always, I'm your host, Aiden Kaczynski, and I'm joined by a full panel today, starting on my left with Shane Nolan. Shane, how are you?
I'm doing good. Ready for Red October?
Yeah, I'm very ready for Red October. And then on my second to my left, we have a new panelist in Brayden Knapp. Brayden, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. And then finally joining us for the first time this season is our usual panelist, Mike Holden. Mike, how are you?
Good to be back. Had some things come up the last couple weeks, but I'm back and ready to roll.
And we're very excited to have you back and to talk about the Eagles, who we'll be starting with first this week. The Eagles are now 3-0 after a very successful win on Monday Night Football over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jalen Hurts looked much better this game, 23 for 37, 277 yards, 3 total touchdowns, although the 2 interceptions is a bit concerning. DeAndre Swift, another great rushing game, 16 carries for under 30 yards. And A.J. Brown finally was able to get the ball with 9 receptions for 131 yards, no touchdowns, but was targeted twice in the red zone. So, Mike, just going off of this week, how much are you excited for the Eagles offense now that they're starting to look a little bit better?
Yeah, it's looked much better than it has the past couple weeks. The first 2 weeks, it's kind of looked like how it looked like with Mike Rowe a couple years ago when he was the offensive coordinator, and hopefully Brian Johnson's starting to get the offense under control a little bit. But, yeah, they looked good until they got into the red zone a little bit. I mean, the red zone was definitely a struggle for them. But Hurts looked good. He had that a couple interceptions, but the offense looked good, and I think it's just going to keep getting better. They have to keep feeding DeAndre Swift. He's looked unstoppable. And A.J. Brown, it seems like, I know they had that miscommunication that he wasn't getting the ball in week 2, but he got his receptions in against the Buccaneers. So it's looking better, and hopefully it keeps getting better.
Yeah, DeAndre Swift, after not getting barely any touches the first week, have now been the second leading rusher in all the NFL. Brayden, I'm going to go to you next. When it comes to this rushing offense, they got so many weapons. How do you get the ball to Kenny Gainwell as well, because of the fact that he was the leading rusher in week 1 and then just really hasn't done anything the last couple of weeks?
I mean, it's an interesting situation because, like you said, the Eagles have an amazing running back group. And what they can do is obviously use Swift as a receiving back because he's very good there, and maybe throw in a couple runs with Gainwell. But as of right now, I would just continue with DeAndre Swift. He's looked great. He's been awesome. And, yeah, he's just going to continue to do what he's doing.
Yeah, the Eagles' defense as well has been one of the best forces in the entire league. You got Jalen Carter, who is a rookie, mind you, 2 forced fumbles and half a sack in this game. Fletcher Cox was the guy to get the other part of that sack. You got Reed Blankenship, 7 tackles and interception. And Nicholas Morrow with his safety on this play right here. Just absolutely amazing defense. Mike, with a defense like this, it is going to be hard to beat the Eagles if they can run the ball this well and just are an unstoppable force on the defensive line.
Yeah, and the whole thing was last year that they lost so many defensive pieces, and that this year it was going to be so much worse. But they look so much better. I mean, obviously you had the guys, Jalen Carter, who obviously I think a lot of people forget he would have been number 1 overall if that off-the-field situation happened, but he's looked like the best player in the draft. He's the best rookie so far. He's looked so good, and him and Jordan Davis are only going to get better each week. But when you look at the secondary, Reed Blankenship, who's kind of filling in for C.J. Gardner-Johnson, he's looked much better as well. But, yeah, I think, like I said with the offense, it's just going to keep getting better each week. You got a new defensive coordinator back there, and they haven't really faced anybody crazy. I mean, I know if you look at the quarterback stats, they have looked good against the Eagles, but they've got the win, so that's all that matters in the end.
Yeah, I mean, another part of this defensive team, you mentioned the injuries to some of those defense backs, the linebackers too. Nakobe Dean was supposed to be the starting middle linebacker, gets hurt in week 1. Nicholas Morrow has been great. Zach Cunningham has been a steal in training camp. Brayden, when you just see these core of guys play together, it's a group that really hasn't played much time sort of getting together. It's really good to see some of these guys like Zach Cunningham, Nicholas Morrow stepping up and making big plays.
Yeah, it's very exciting to see him because obviously with the season coming in, it's a new defense, new defensive coordinator. and it was kind of a little bit of unknowingness of how they're going to play with each other. But so far, they've stepped up and they've been great, especially with the absence in the Kobe Dean.
Yeah, I mean, those linebackers, that was a big question mark for the Eagles. These guys have stepped up, been great. So that is really good to see for the Eagles, and it shows in the standings when you look at it. The Eagles are the only undefeated team left in the NFC East. They're one of only 2 teams undefeated in the NFC, them and the 49ers. The Cowboys lost a shocking game to the Cardinals, which we'll get in later in the show. The Commanders lost 1 game so far, so they're 2-1, and the Giants are 1-2. Brayden, I'm going to go with you first. The Eagles and Cowboys, they look like the 2 strongest teams, even the Cardinals beating the Cowboys. Yeah. What is your feeling with the standings right now? I know it's really end of the season, but it's good to be 3-0 at this point.
It's very good to be 3-0, especially with the schedule coming up, because the Eagles are going to face some tough teams coming up. But as of right now, honestly, I feel like how the standings are now, my prediction is that's how it's going to end and the season's over.
Yeah, and you've got the Giants at 1-2. That's the team that the Eagles will play really late in the season, the last 2 games, including a game on Christmas. So, Mike, when you look at it that way, yes, they're struggling, but the Giants were a playoff team last year. You can't rule them out even with how poorly they've played so far this season.
You can't rule them out, but at the same time, I think the Eagles are, besides the Cowboys, they're a class over both the Commanders and the Giants. And I think they're much better than the Cowboys. And now that the Cowboys lost Trayvon Diggs, too, that defense took a little bit of a hit, as you saw versus the Cardinals. So, like Brayden said, I think how the standings are now, I think that's where you might flip-flop the Giants and Commanders, but I still think it's the Eagles' division to lose.
So the Eagles are 3-0, which is a really good sign, but there is a lot of concern still that Jalen Hurts hasn't looked like the guy that he was last year. The defense at certain points in a couple of games sort of seemed to fall apart until they got together on a couple key plays. So I'm going to go to both of you. What is your major concern 3 weeks into the season?
Yeah, for me, I think it's just how the offense kind of has looked play calling wise. I mean, Jalen, start of the season, I know it's, you're not going to, they didn't play any preseason games, so it's going to start off a little slow, but I think just play calling, because last year, obviously, you lost Shane Steichen, that's going to be huge, and I just hope that they can get it together, because it has not looked pretty the first couple weeks play calling wise.
Yeah, I can build off of that. I mean, as of right now, the offense has not clicked like they were last season, but each game they're looking more and more like themselves from last season, and I think as more games come on and this next game against the Commanders, I think they're going to click.
Yeah, so definitely good to see them 3-0. And you mentioned the Commanders game that's coming up. That is a really important game because it is a division rival in the Commanders. You got Sam Howell, who did not play well at all last week, 170 yards, 0 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and a huge loss to the Bills. Commanders defense allowed 168 rushing yards to a Bills team that doesn't really have a good running back. So, Brayden, there is a lot of good things that the Eagles could do, especially with the rush offense, with how much the Commanders struggled with the Bills last week.
Yeah, there's a lot we can do. I think one of the main things we can do is feed DeAndre Swift the ball. I mean, I see no reason how they're going to stop him. You saw how the Commanders played against the Bills last week, and I think, honestly, the Eagles are going to beat them even more.
Yeah, and Mike, when it comes to the defense, you've got to feel that they can get pressure on Sam Howell. They're going to force turnovers the way that the Bills did last week. This game could potentially be a blowout if the Eagles play really well on all facets of the ball.
Yeah, it should be, and Sam Howell he's not a great quarterback, and if you can just get pressure at him, he's going to throw picks like you said that he did last week. So I think it should be a blowout type game, kind of how the Eagles had early in the season last season. But yeah, the Commanders are not that scary. Josh Harris, that ownership group coming into Philly, so it should be a win, but it'll be a good game. We'll see.
Yeah, before we wrap up the Eagles, another guy I want to give a shout out is Brayden Knapp. There was a lot of people saying that he shouldn't be the returner. Last week had an amazing game, nearly broke a couple of touchdowns, but was stopped short. Both of you guys, I'm going to ask, do you feel more confident in Brayden Knapp week by week, especially considering how much he struggled early last year? And do you think that in the near future we could see him get a touchdown?
Yeah, I mean how he looked. I mean the return he had last season is definitely optimistic. I mean he's had his struggles, but hopefully going up and down from the practice squad kind of gives him some motivation to keep improving.
Yeah, and then quick score predictions from you guys, and I'll give mine. What do you guys think is going to happen this week?
I'll say 31-17 Birds.
I say Birds got 35, and then we're going to go with 13 for the Commanders.
All right, that's a good one. I'm going to say the offense goes off. I think they get 42. I think there's a lot of turnovers. I'll give 10 to the Commanders. I think they get a couple late touchdowns. But, yeah, no one here really thinks it's a close game, so hopefully the Eagles live up to that expectation. A team that has lived up to the expectations is the Philadelphia Phillies. Last year lost in the World Series, got off to a super slow start this year, but they clinched a playoff spot for the second year in a row, which is the first time that's happened since 2010 and 2011. And a really nice thing that happened after after, or to get to that point, was a sweep over the Mets last week. They're now 88-69, so that's just a really good record to have. One win better than last year, and there's still 5 games left. So, Mike, when I'm going to start with you, how excited are you to see what the Phillies could do this postseason with what's happened later this year?
Yeah, it's definitely a much more. I feel like last year when they clinched, it was kind of more relief that they finally got into the playoffs. This year it's kind of more expected, but it's more of excitement that I know we're in the wild card round and we got to play a couple extra games to get with the Braves and Dodgers, but it's there's so much to be excited about. This team is clicking on all cylinders. I know the bullpen, there's some questions there, but there's just so much to be excited about with this team right now.
Yeah, and Shane, I'll go to you next. There are so many guys that are hitting home runs on this team. You've got Bryce that got to 20 after a slow start. Alec Boehm's sitting at 19, close to 20. Do you expect them to keep hitting this way in the postseason?
Yeah, I do, especially because they get 3 games at home, and they've hit well at home this year. JT started to heat up against the Mets. He's starting to hit home runs. Nick Castellanos starting to heat up. So you're getting guys starting to heat up at the right time and hitting a lot of home runs. They have about 4 or 5 players with 20 home runs, and like you said, Alec Boehm just needs 1 more to make it 6.
Yeah, in the game-clinching game, too, Aaron Nola looked awesome. Pitched 6 in the 3rd innings, only allowed 1 run, a couple of hits. His last 2 starts have looked like what we expect from Aaron Nola. So, Mike, do you expect that to continue for him in the postseason, or do you think his midseason struggles might come back to hurt him?
Yeah, I mean, last season he pitched that clinching game too, and that kind of helped him for his first couple starts in the playoffs. So I think it should, and especially that's huge because now you got everybody on normal rest for the playoffs, so you don't have to worry about anybody starting on short rest or anything. So I think it's huge, and that could have been his last regular season start in Citizens Bank Park. Hopefully we'll see kind of how the playoffs shake out with him, and if they want to keep him or not, we'll kind of see what happens there.
Yeah, another guy that's had a really up and down season is Kyle Schwarber, and I don't really even know how to put it besides just strange. His batting average is 196, which seems terrible, but he's hit 45 home runs and 100 RBIs. He has 124 walks, but also 212 strikeouts. But his on-base percentage is 343, which is really, really good considering how poor his batting average is. At 812 OPS, but only a .5 WAR. Shane, how do you just think about the season that he's having? Because I don't know whether to say it's good or bad.
He's a guy who's going to strike out a lot, but he's a guy who's going to hit a lot of home runs. He has back-to-back 40-plus home runs. He's stuck on 45 right now. But also, he has walked a lot. He has walked a lot this year, which has been a good sign, being the leadoff hitter, and something that you didn't expect him to do this year, just because of the type of he's a power hitter who's going to hit home runs. But yeah, it's been a strange year for him. Lately, he's been stuck on those 45 home runs. It looked like he's been waiting to walk a lot more and missing a lot of pitches down the middle of the plate, though.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fact that he's really just been up and down the walks, and the fact that he was the leadoff hitter, too. Mike, that is a very big controversial issue in the city when it comes to the Phillies, is him being the leadoff hitter. Do you feel comfortable with him in that role going into the postseason?
Yeah, at this point, I remember last year there was a lot of talk, and I was kind of on the fence about him leading off. I think now that a full season of it, I think you just keep it there at this point. It worked last season. I think that's where he's had the most success. So I don't think you change it. I wasn't really a fan of it when Turner got here. I kind of was always a fan of the speed at the top, but hey, it's worked. So I think just stick with it and just let it ride.
Yeah, we haven't even mentioned Trey Turner yet. His turnaround to the season has been unbelievable considering where he was at. A lot of fans didn't want him even just starting at a certain point. So there were some people asking for Sosa to go in. So it's been really cool to see the turnaround that he's had this season. And when you check out the standings, all these guys coming together is really, really big for them. When you go through the first seed in the wild card, obviously, you got the Diamondbacks that are 5 games behind them. With that, Cubs lost their 6 games back and just barely holding a lead over the Marlins for that 3rd wild card spot. The Marlins and Reds have fallen behind, but there is a couple games left this season that they could turn around. So, Shane, I'm going to go with you first. It looks like we're going to be playing the Diamondbacks at this point. Do you feel confident in a series with them at home?
I do, but I'm someone who may probably want to face the Cubs more. But just because now if the Cubs keep winning, the Diamondbacks aren't going to be able to set their rotation the way they want it. So they're not going to be able to use Zach Gallen in Game 1 probably. They're not going to be able to use Kelly in Game 2 if they wanted to. So I feel like I'm a little bit more confident. The Phillies have more experience. They're going to play at home. We know how they play. We know how they play at home, especially last year. They only lost 2 games at home last year, and there was 2 games in the World Series. but they have the crowd behind them and stuff. So I feel confident they're going to, if they have to play the Diamondbacks, they're going to take the 2 games.
You mentioned that the Diamondbacks wouldn't be able to set the rotation. The Phillies have their rotation set already. You can rest guys. Zach Wheeler's going to start game 1. That's already been said by Ron Thompson. Their 1 through 9 just looks completely stacked. Like, there's not a whole lot of gaps where you can get outs. Mike, this could be a team that's set up to go on another deep run like last year.
Yeah, and I kind of just want to bring this up too because I heard on the radio they're talking about maybe Hoskins for the World Series if they get that far. But then there's the question, do you take that out and use him for DH and then you lose the defense, or do you maybe use him just to pinch hit? So that could be an option later on. But yeah, like you said, this lineup is so deep, and I think any team will be scared to play this team, especially like Shane said, in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that point up because I was going to mention that too. What do you think you do if Rhys Hoskins come back? Because Harper's been playing so well at first, but you also want to make sure that Rhys doesn't get hurt. I mean, Kyle Schwarber tore his ACL and then played for the Cubs in the World Series, so they could have him DH.
Yeah, I think that, or I think the better option might be just so you don't disrupt anything, maybe just have him on the bench and maybe, he's great against lefties, so maybe you bring him in a lefty in a situation, maybe. But I don't know. We'll see kind of how it plays out. We got to get to the World Series first, so we'll see how it plays out. But that would be great. He would be a great piece off the bench.
Yeah, it would be a really awesome piece. So sort of like how we did in Eagles prediction, let's do a Phillies 1. They've got 2 games definitely against the Diamondbacks. A possible third if they lose one of those games. What do you guys think happens in the next 3 games?
I think that whoever they play, I think they'll win both in 2 games.
I think they win 2 games as well. They're playing at home. You got the fans behind you. I think they take 2 games against whoever they play.
Yeah, and that is a good point. That it's whoever they play, not necessarily Diamondbacks. That's just who it looks like right now. The last 3 or 4 games will be really interesting for other teams, but Phillies fans can take a little break from baseball and can tune back next week after the playoffs are finally set. Another team, though, that can't rest for where they are in playoff positioning is the Union. Right now, they are in a very close race with a couple other teams for playoff seeding. It's been an interesting year for them. They're not where they were last year as the 1 seed in the East. Right now, they're the 4th. When you look at their standings, it's pretty interesting. You got Andre Blake with a 14-7-8 record, which for him is okay, but not really where he was last year. Or that's their record now, sorry. Andre Blake's record is 11-6-4. Julian Carranza, 27 games played, 12 goals, 5 assists, which is good, not as good as last year. And right now there's 4 games left in the regular season. So, Brayden, I'll go to you first. What is your feeling so far on this season?
My feeling on this season, obviously, it's not what it was last season, which is a little disappointing. But it's not like the Union are still out of it. They're still very much involved in the playoff hunt. They're in the playoffs. It's just now, seeding-wise, if they can move higher up or even drop down lower, they need to continue their form.
Yeah, so that core of guys that you have between Gazdag, Carranza, and Andre Blake, they've played well. Blake's been hurt a couple of times. Carranza's out with a concussion right now. And Gazdag only has 13 goals at this point in the season compared to 22 at the end of last year. This core, to me, just hasn't looked the same as it did last year. And is that just fatigue, or is that just teams are starting to figure out how to play these guys?
I think a little bit has to do with fatigue. Unfortunately, yeah, they're just not performing like they did last season. And one big player, Alejandro Bedoya, who was fantastic last season, he's just getting up there in age and he's starting to slow down. And I think everyone else is getting up there in age and they're just, unfortunately, slowing down.
Yeah, and you do have that core of guys. You've also got Jim Kirchen that's signed a 2-year contract in the middle of this summer, so he'll at least be here for another 2 years. How big is that for the Union's success? He's been the most successful coach that they've ever had. It's good to know that he'll be coming back in the near future, no matter what happens the rest of the season.
It's very good to know because obviously he's a great coach and he clicks well with a lot of the players and the system here at the Union. And even if for some reason this season it doesn't go to plan, next season and the years upcoming, I guarantee the Union will not be out of it. They'll be contenders next couple of years.
Yeah, and even though this year's been disappointing, it's important to note they're not out of it now. Right now they have the 4th seed. They're tied with a couple other teams in Atlanta United FC and New England. You've also had the Columbus Crew there, all tied with them at 49 points. And they're only 2 points behind, they are 2 points behind Orlando City. And it seems like Cincinnati's got the East locked up, but that's not for certain yet. When it comes down to it, do you think the Union can get to that 2 seed?
I think they can definitely get to that 2 seed. Now with their matches coming up, they're going to have to get points. Their next game against FC Dallas, that's a big game. They got to get points against a Western Conference team who's also trying to make the playoffs. So it's going to be tough, and they have to get points. They can't keep drawing. They have to start getting wins.
Yeah, they've tied the last 3 games, which just you can't draw, like Brayden said, at this point in the season. They've also got 2 really important games coming up against the Columbus Crew, and then their last game is against New England. To me, those are must-win games. If you don't win those, there's a chance that you drop all the way down the seeding, and that just isn't a good sign for them.
You have to win those games. Those games are not, okay, maybe we lose one, but win the other. No, they have to be wins, and even the other games have to win. And honestly, the next game against FC Dallas will be tough because FC Dallas' last game was against Columbus, and they drew 1-1. So it's going to be a tough game, and all the next couple games, it's going to be tough, and they're going to have to fight to get points.
Yeah, and you've got a couple of games. Krause's concussion, that happened a little while ago, but he's still not healthy. And a concussion, you don't really know how long that can last for. So do you expect him to come back for the playoffs? And if he does, do you expect him to be 100% at that point?
I think he'll come back from the playoffs. Obviously, with a concussion, they're hard, and you don't know how long they're going to be out. But I think with still a couple weeks left and then the playoffs, I think he'll be back by then, and he'll be ready to go.
So this is sort of a 2-part question. So like I said, very close to standings. How do you think that they fare against some of these other playoff teams, and who do you think is the biggest threat to them in the playoffs?
I feel like, well, against all the top teams right now, it can be anyone's game. I feel like they just have to perform. Obviously, Cincinnati's having an incredible season. They look dangerous. And if Inter Miami can come up and make the playoffs, then obviously they're going to be the big team that you're going to have to watch out for in the East.
Yeah, and I was going to mention Miami just because right now they're not in the playoffs, but that's sort of like the elephant in the room with Lionel Messi. Do you think that the Union pair up in a way that they could stop Messi if Miami is somehow able to make it into the playoffs?
They can definitely hold their own against Messi. Obviously, it's Messi. It's going to be very tough, but they can. But everyone has to be on their game, and they all have to play good.
Yeah, and one thing that I am happy to know is that New York City FC just did not even make the playoffs and aren't even close to doing it. It's a team that's been a rival with the Union for a while, so it's sort of good to see that they're not really in the standings. And hopefully, as Brayden said, the Union can make a good run in the playoffs, and we'll keep talking about them on this show. That wraps up all the Philly teams, but we're going to get into the Fast Five, starting with, again, our favorite segment, Talking Baseball with Shane Nolan.
Atlanta Braves starter Spencer Strider was asked what his MLB hot take was, and he said no fans at baseball games, specifically behind the dugout, because they were too loud. Listen, you little weasel. Those fans, you probably wouldn't have a career if there were no fans, and you probably wouldn't be making the amount of money you are making without them as well. So just maybe next time, shut up and don't say anything. And whether he was joking or not, I don't care because I hate the Braves. So,
I've got a theory about this, honestly, and I said this to Shane when he was telling me this before the show. I think that Spencer Strider has PTSD from last year when he was pitching in Philadelphia. Like, that's honestly what I think it is.
yeah, he probably could. I mean, whatever it is, I hope we can make it to the division series and he has to pitch again in Philadelphia.
That would be so fun. That would be so much. I know the Braves are a really good team, but that would be so much fun to get to fight them again at home. We're now going to go to a football question with Mike. The Miami Dolphins put up a whopping 70 points on the Denver Broncos, which is the most points scored in a game since 1966, and tied the record for the second most points ever scored in a football game. It is only 3 weeks of the season, though, but do you think that they are Super Bowl contenders at this point?
No, I think they'll probably score like 20 points next week. Right now, they might be, their offense is great, but I don't think they're the favorites. I think the favorites are still probably either the Eagles or the Niners and then the Chiefs, too. But I think the Dolphins are a good team, but I think 70 points might be a little fluky. I think it is fluky. Obviously, their offense is great. Tyreek Hill is great. Jalen Waddle is great, but I think they'll come back to earth a little bit next week.
Yeah, I don't think many people are expecting them to put up 70 points, although I will say the one team that a lot of people were really high on in the Cincinnati Bengals have not looked good this year. So they could potentially, and the Bills also didn't look good either. So would you think that there's a chance that they could win the AFC if Tua stays healthy, at least the AFC East?
Yeah, I mean, the AFC, right now, obviously you have the Chiefs, but then you mentioned, the Bengals who just have not looked good. Joe Burrow dealing with injuries. I think the Bills are probably at the top in my list right now, and then behind the Chiefs. But the Dolphins are there. I think they will win the East, but I think the AFC is still a little bit too competitive for them. But it should be fun playoffs.
Yeah, and now I'm going to go to another football question to Brayden. The Dallas Cowboys lost a very shocking game to the Arizona Cardinals. They were 2-0, riding high, not so much anymore. What is your thoughts on this game after this result?
Very happy, and I think I speak with all of Philadelphia. We were very happy watching them lose. Obviously, it's kind of a bit of a fluke game. They were very good. they've been very good the first 2 games, but then Trayvon Diggs injury, out for the whole year, and then now against the Cardinals, a shock loss. But I mean, I still think they're going to be up there. They're going to be contenders. You still got to fear them a little bit.
Yeah, so many great storylines for the Cardinals. I think my favorite is that Joshua Dobbs, who's their starting quarterback this year, didn't even have his jersey in the team, just like where they were selling all the gear for the fans. And then after this game, he was finally able to buy his own jersey, which I just find hilarious that the Cardinals couldn't even get it together for that. So even though they won this game, they're still not a very functional organization, in my opinion. But maybe things will change now that they actually won a game. I'm going to go back to Shane with another baseball question. The New York Yankees will be missing the playoffs. Right now, we're fighting to stay over 500. If they fall under and finish under 500, it'll be the first time that has happened to them in 30 years. What is your biggest takeaway from this team, and what do you think the biggest concern for Yankees fans is in the near future?
I think they're still going to have Giancarlo Stanton on the team. He hasn't been very good this year, and they signed him to that big contract, which was awful. Aaron Judge, he got hurt this year. He missed a good part half of the season, and once again they signed him to that big contract as well, which wasn't the wrong thing to do. But he's been injured the past couple of years. Anthony Rizzo got injured. They do kind of have a good group of young talent, and Anthony Volpe and Oswaldo Cabrera. But yeah, it's been a disaster season for them.
Yeah, not a good year. We'll see if they keep Brian Cashman and Boone around as well as their manager, but we'll see. The last thing that I want to talk about is something that happened in the Chiefs-Bears game where Taylor Swift showed up to be with Travis Kelce. They're dating or they're together. I'm not really sure what it is, but there's a couple people that need to thank Taylor Swift for showing up this game. One is Patrick Mahomes, because he was asked 4 questions about Taylor Swift, and no one really asked about the ankle that he re-injured, which is the 3rd time in 6 games he's injured his ankle. So there wasn't really many questions about that. So we'll be interested to see how that ankle injury holds up. And the other team person that needs to thank Taylor Swift, and it is the entire team, is the Chicago Bears. They were flat out awful in this game. They scored 10 points. Justin Fields does not look like an NFL quarterback. And thankfully, more people are talking about Taylor Swift than the Bears' performance, which, as a Bears fan, thank you, Taylor Swift, for showing up and making sure that the Bears can sort of just hide away, at least until next week when they play against the Broncos, because if you lose that game, you just shouldn't even be an NFL franchise anymore. That wraps up this episode of Sports Talk Philadelphia. Thank you so much for watching. You can follow us on our social medias at Twitter and Instagram at Sports Talk LTV, where we'll be posting a lot more Phillies content as well as they make their postseason run. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to tune in next week.